here to try and explain something to you which English speakers find to be very, very, very challenging. So if you find it challenging, it's okay. I completely understand. It is something that many people have found challenging in classes that I have taught in the past, so you are not alone. Now, one thing that we often tend to do whenever we are talking in English is we will talk by substituting words like it or her or their or mine or yours, and without thinking about it, we will often substitute these words for the object that we're talking about. We do this because whenever we're talking in English, it's very clunky, right, to continue to say the same thing over and over again. For example, I often like to say, right, if we had wanted to talk about a blue sweater that we had gotten from our friend, right, maybe our sister lent us a blue sweater, we wouldn't continue to use the phrase a blue sweater whenever we were talking about it. We would say something like it. So let me give you the example, right? The example would say something like, I got the blue sweater for my sister. I took the blue sweater to a dry cleaner. Then at the dry cleaner, they cleaned the blue sweater for me. After I went and picked up that blue sweater, I wore the blue sweater out and it was lovely. I wore the blue sweater multiple times in the weeks to come. We would not continue to say the blue sweater, the blue sweater, the blue sweater, because it would be very clunky. Well, we would replace it, right? We would say, I got the blue sweater for my sister. Then I took it to the dry cleaner, then they cleaned it, then I brought it back, then I wore it, then I wore it a lot of times and it was so great. We would keep saying it. Well, in Spanish, right, it doesn't exist because none of the objects that we're talking about in Spanish are gender neutral. So that's something to kind of keep in mind whenever we first start to talk about direct and indirect object pronouns, because one of the main things that people really start to find confusing about this area is the gender and quantity issue of these pronouns. But if you remember, these objects already had that gender and quantity attached to them before we learned them as pronouns. So now we're just putting that into a bit of a deeper practice. Here, I've written down, right, what I call them and what the book calls them, right, which is pronombre del objetivo directo y indirecto. Sometimes in Spanish it's called el complemento del objetivo directo y indirecto. It's basically the same, but it's the same thing that we're talking about. So if you've seen that maybe in another textbook, it is sometimes also called that. The direct object pronouns are these. This is how the book lists them. Now, one of the things that you can do though is direct object pronouns are almost always, as in 99% of the time, they're going to be objects. Now, if you remember, or maybe you don't, but objects are always going to be third person. So the most common form of the direct object pronoun is going to be the third person. So sometimes you will see this box simplified without these in it, and it will just be simplified into this, right? Where there's just the masculine, feminine, singular, plural of this part of the box, because almost always these are objects. Now again, almost always, although not all of the time, but 99% of the time, right, these are going to always be people. So it's not necessarily all the time, but it's most prevalent that an indirect object is going to talk about a person rather than an object. So that's also something to kind of keep in mind whenever you're trying to think of what is the direct object and what is the indirect object. If you go for the object and you think it's direct, you're probably right. And if you go for the indirect object and you think it's a person, then you're also probably right. You'll see here there's this little se. That's because there's a small exception in these rules when it comes to third persons being together, two third persons appearing together. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. Now in English, direct and indirect object pronouns are relatively simple. This is because, right, in English, the sentence structure of direct and indirect object pronouns doesn't alter the sentence. If we wrote, right, I wrote a letter, we have the subject here, the verb here, and here we have the direct object. If we say I wrote it, we still have the subject here, the verb here, and the direct object pronoun. Okay? So we still have the same sentence structure, we've just replaced this word with it. Here again, right, I spoke to Isabel, right, we have the subject here, the verb here, and the indirect object. Here we have the subject, I spoke to her, subject, verb, and here, right, we're going to have the indirect object pronoun. Okay? But you'll notice that the structure of the sentence didn't change, right? You still have subject, verb, and anything that comes after. This is not at all how this functions in Spanish. And this is part of the reason why people find this to be so confusing. In Spanish, the way that we conjugate sentences, the way that we put sentences together is subject plus verb plus either direct object or indirect object. But whenever we add in a pronoun and we take out the object itself, we completely rearrange the sentence to create what to me looks like a little subject-verb sandwich. We will write subject plus indirect object pronoun plus direct object pronoun plus verb, right? Or subject plus indirect object pronoun plus verb, or subject plus direct object pronoun plus verb. You'll notice the pronoun is always coming between the subject and the verb. I'll give you an example, right? Here we'll follow the same example here. Yo escribí una carta. Here we have the subject. Then we have the verb. Here we have the objetivo directo, right? The direct object, okay? So far, the same as English. But when we're going to use a pronoun, we have to reorganize the sentence, and the pronoun is going to come between the subject and the verb. So here we have subject, direct object pronoun, verb, right? Yo lo escribí. O yo la escribí, perdón. And the reason why we would use la over other pronouns, right, is because una carta is feminine and singular, right? We're only talking about one letter. Here again, right, if we talk about people, yo hablé a Isabel, right? So we have our subject and our verb and our indirect object. But if we want to say I spoke to her, we have to reorganize the sentence in order to say that and put that pronoun between the subject and the verb, which is always where they're going to go. They're always going to go between the subject and the verb. So here, right, yo le hablé, right? Indirect object, pronoun, verb, between the subject and the verb. So this sometimes confuses people a little bit, but theoretically, right, in Spanish, we don't say, I spoke to her. We say, I, her, spoke. We don't say, I wrote it. We say, I, it wrote. If we wanted to say, I wrote a letter for Isabel, and we wanted to say, I wrote it for her, we wouldn't say that in Spanish. We would say, I, her, it wrote. Okay? I know that that is a little bit confusing, but that's the literal translation of what it is that we're doing. So here, let's take a few examples. Nosotros mandamos un un paquete a ti. Okay? Here, right, we're going to find the subject, right? Nosotros. Mandamos is the verb, right? And what did we send, right? We sent a package, right? The direct object is always going to answer the question, what? What did we send? We sent a package. Okay, so we know that that has to be the direct object. Okay? We also know that package is masculine and singular because we have un here. So if we look at the pronouns, right, we know that it's going to be lo. Okay? Then the indirect object, oh, I don't think you can see it all the way up there. The indirect object is always going to answer the question, who? So I sent a package, but who did I send it to? I sent it to you, right? So I know that's going to be the indirect object. And a ti is to you, so that is second person singular, right? So that would be they. Okay, now remember, these words have to go between the subject and the verb. So I have to say subject, nosotros. Then the order is always indirect object pronoun first, direct object pronoun first. So I start with the back and I move forwards. So the indirect object pronoun is te. The direct object pronoun is lo. And the verb is mandamos. In English, we would say, I sent it to you. But in Spanish, they would say, right, I, you, it sent. Nosotros te lo mandamos. Tú diste una blusa rosada a mí. So the subject is tú. The verb is diste. Then what did I give? Or what did the person give? They gave una blusa rosada, right? So that has to be the direct object. And una indicates to me that it is both singular and feminine. So we know that we're going to use la, right? And who did we give this shirt to? We gave it a mí, okay? So that is going to be the indirect object. And we know that me is yo, right? So that's going to be me. So now I got to reorganize, right? First I'm going to write the subject, right? Then I have to write the indirect object pronoun, me, the direct object pronoun, la, and then the verb, diste. Tú me la diste. Let's go to 4 and then we'll go to 3. Mari Carmen dijo unos chistes a nosotros. So here we have our subject, Mari Carmen. Dijo is the verb, right? What did she say? Unos chistes. So that's our direct object right there. And well, who did she say them to? She said them to a nosotros, right? And we know by unos that it's plural and it's masculine. So we know that we're going to use the word los. We know a nosotros, right, is going to be nos, right? So, okay? So now we have to reorganize again, right? So we're going to put our subject, Mari Carmen. And remember, the pronouns are going to go between the subject and the verb. They always go in order of indirect, then direct. So, nos, los dijo. She told them to us, right? Emilia dio unas flores a Gertrudis. This is where the third person exception kind of comes in. It's a little bit tricky, but you remember that when we were looking at these direct object pronouns, we said, right, that objects are always third person, right? First, second, third, objects are always third person. So if a direct object pronoun is always a third person, then we just have to watch out to know if the indirect object is also a third person. So we know that this is a third person because it's an object. And now Gertrudis is a third person because it's her. So we have two third persons together. When we have two third persons together like this, the exception kicks in. And the exception is, instead of le, we're going to use se. That's the only difference. So here we have our subject, here we have our verb, here we have our direct object. What did she give? She gave some flowers. And these would be las, right, because it's unas. Then here we have Gertrudis, who is our indirect object, right, because she answers the question who. Now normally, Gertrudis would be le, right, because here we have this one here. But because we have two third persons together, that le becomes se. Now we're going to reorganize. So first we're going to write our subject, which is Emilia. Then we're going to write our indirect object pronoun, right? That one always comes first. So se, las, direct object pronoun, dio. Emilia se las dio. Now it would probably be more common, because we like to use double emphasis in Spanish, so it would actually probably be more common to say Emilia se las dio a Gertrudis. And we would still probably use her name to give it a double emphasis. But that's just something that is very common in a lot of Spanish speaking, right? And as far as Spanish language is concerned, there's often double negation or double emphasis in things that in English there would only be one. I hope that that has helped a little bit and not confused you more. If you have any questions, you can just let me know. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye.